Hey guys, Edre here, and I'm so excited for this review I am going to be doing today. This is probably going to be my longest review because this is so far one of the longest albums I have reviewed. This is the 1975 album, Notes on a Conditional Form. I had really high hopes for this album. I mean, first off, a little bit of background. I've always quite enjoyed their sound. I've always quite enjoyed their sophomore album, and I really like Brief Inquiry a lot. In fact, Brief Inquiry is the album that really made me start appreciating them more seriously as a band, not just in like the pop sense. And even though I love that album, I wanted to see them go somewhere different. And when these singles started dropping, I loved People, I loved Frail State of Mind. I thought that what they were doing was good, and all of them had a nice variety. And I was really excited to see what new direction, or what multiple new directions they would end up going down. And I gotta say, I am more than pleased with what ended up happening. I know I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but you know I like Radiohead. To me, this feels like it's their Kid A. But I'm going to go deep into actually every single track on this album. I think each and every track has something to give. And needless to say, I'm going to go more in depth on the overall album once I go through each and every track. But I love this album, and I'm really excited to review it. And I know this has polarized some fans, but I'm one of the ones that really appreciates it. This album opens up, like all their other albums, with a self-titled 1975 titled song. But this one's very different. This one features Greta Thunberg on the vocals on here. And by saying vocals, I mean they brought her in to do a speech. And what really strikes me a lot about this is the first thing you hear going into this album. This is already making a clear political statement, a clear social statement on a lot of things, and especially climate change. They are not afraid to hide that, but they do it in a way that doesn't come off as cringy, but in like a way that feels urgent, like wake up. What makes this opener even more impactful for me is the soft little piano, the soft little elements of the strings and everything going on in the background. Very soft sounds playing and plucking throughout reminds me of Radiohead's sounds on a moon-shaped pool. You could tell right away that they are paying so much attention to detail, something that an average small artist like me would never have even thought of. And this transitions directly into the song People. I know I haven't really I've talked a little bit when I was reviewing some of the singles about People, but People really stands out as being really the only song on this album that really even falls into this type of heavy, rock genre. But the transition is so good. Despite it being a major outlier in terms of genre and style, this song arguably captures the essence and message of this album better than any other song on this entire project. And the overall musicianship on this track is just so good that even if it is kind of feels out of place for some, I can't help but love it. Not only is his vocal performance just so strong here, the guitar work, the little lead, the small details throughout this track, the production is phenomenal. It all comes together in a perfect song that just really digs in that point that Greta made on the opening track. People need to wake up and act now. In a sharp contrast, the following track, The End, Music for Cars, is an instrumental piece, a relatively shorter piece. The End features some great strings. The strings on here were so touching and full of emotion that it actually made me tear up when I first heard this track. It's a beautiful instrumental piece that, well, sure, this may not be their most memorable piece in their entire discography, but the emotion packed into this 2.5 minutes of pure instrumental strings and just a whole bunch of just beautiful details scattered throughout the production. I teared up when I first heard it. It really gears you up for Frail State of Mind. Frail State of Mind, I didn't get around to reviewing those before I started this channel, but that drum beat is just anxiety in a song. It's so kind of out of place, but works so well. And the overall, and this song has grown on me a ton since I first heard it as a single, because now it makes so much more sense in context to the album. This reminds me of some of the more abstract electronic artists out there, and I really like that style of beat, and this will kind of show up a lot throughout this album, but I never got tired of it because they execute it so well here. The song streaming actually gave me a lot of C418 vibes. If you know C418, the Minecraft soundtrack guy, he has great music outside of Minecraft and everything. But the little sort of more unconventional instruments, the little plucking throughout this song is just really well put together, and it kind of serves as a prelude to The Birthday Party, a song which, much like Frail State of Mind, really didn't hit me much until I heard it in the full context. You know, lyrically, it hit me a lot harder. Musically, I think the entrance of the drums coming in so flawlessly and seamlessly from streaming really makes it almost like the perfect transition. Lyrically, I really do like the Pine Grove reference on here. There's just little details throughout this entire album lyrically that really make this thing stand out against all their previous albums and all the albums that you're getting out there nowadays. One of the parts that I really didn't think much of when I first heard it was really how much the twangy guitar foreshadowed what was to come on this album later on, and songs such as Roadkill and some of the songs that happen later on down this album when it gets a little bit more rocky, I guess you could say. The guitar work on this thing, phenomenal. It really didn't stick out to me at first, mainly because it's not as upfront as the vocals and the drums are, but when you actually sit down and fully listen to this, you hear all these little guitar things that you didn't hear the first time, and The Birthday Party has grown on me a ton since I first heard it. The song Yeah I Know was definitely one of my favorites just upon first listen. I think that it's taps throughout it, like the little not like the hi-hat type thing, but it is like little taps throughout the production that just kind of give you a little off-settling vibe. And it just feels wacky, and it's a good kind of wacky. And the vocal production is phenomenal. You hear his voice very briefly show up from ear to ear with some filters on it, but enough that it feels personal. It does give me a lot of, it does make me feel like Tom York's solo work on The Eraser and Tomorrow's Modern Boxes a lot, and I absolutely adore that synth sound, the synth pad that they're using on this song so much. It just adds so much uniqueness, so much more detail to this song that it's hard to even express in words how much I really love that sound. And this is, as far as I know, the end of side A if you're going on a vinyl record. And this transitions into the song Then Because She Goes. And Then Because She Goes, the first thing that came to mind was a much more Britpop feel, with much more brush-sounding drums, and it could have been a single, but I'm kind of glad they didn't. This arguably may be the weakest song on here, but that's really pushing it, because this song is really well, solidly put together. Sure, it's not maybe the strongest, most unique track on here, but it fits perfectly on this album, and I don't have much negative to say here really at all. The following track, Jesus Christ 2005 God Bless America, is one that's already pretty well known at this point, but just like all the other singles, I've noticed many things that I didn't really think about when I first heard it. From the little background elements, the little foghorn type sounds throughout this thing that just add like a kind of a somber tone to the track, to the excellent vocal melody and lyrics. I mean, Maddie's vocal melody on, I guess you could say the chorus, but it's not really a chorus, is so nostalgic yet so original. And that comes up a lot throughout this project, and that shines really bright on Jesus Christ. The conflict in the lyrics between religion and sexuality is something that he portrays perfectly here, and Phoebe's entrance into the song is a very easy transition, and lyrically she kind of adds on to that theme of religion and sexuality quite a bit. And I think this song really shows off Maddie's more folky side, and there's a big difference between making an acoustic track and a folky side, and this, to me, is some of the best folky stuff I've heard from him. And this song is definitely one of the highlights on this album. This song goes straight into Roadkill, which is, as a friend of mine said, sounds like it could have been on the Cars soundtrack, but in the best possible way. And I agree. You know, the guitars on here, this is some of the best guitar work I've ever heard them give. And it's a very ironic take on American society. It has a very country twang to it, and it's kind of very critical of the American culture in a lot of ways, bringing up stuff regarding the election, bringing up more offensive terms towards LGBTQ people. It definitely shows a more dystopian way of America that a lot of Americans don't see. And this song I feel like will have to grow on me quite a bit, but it's a great tune. And it goes into the Me and You Together song, a song that, if you watch my channel, I did not give the best review when I first heard it. And that was simply because I had no context to it. I thought, why are they making this song so out of the blue? What is the point? This is horrible. But after hearing it a bunch, not only has just the overall melody and chords and the chorus all grown on me, the overall context of the song really, and the overall production has really grown on me 1,000 times and makes so much sense. I really love the kind of ironic take on 2000s pop and a little bit of Brit pop there as well, but it's a very original sounding song, and a lot of that lies in the production. The very crisp and dreamy production on the guitars really gives me some throwbacks to some 80s and 90s production. And yet, this song still feels like a 1975 track, and it has grown on me ever since I heard it. It's the grower, not a shower. The following track, I think There's Something You Should Know, is kind of a throwback to some of those earlier songs on this record, like Frail State of Mind and Yeah, I Know. You know, it very has that staccato type drum beat that's kind of a little unsettling, but for somebody like me who's kind of always listened to some electronic music, those elements really stick out to me as being really well put together, and I quite like that a lot. I really dig the piano bass on this song. What I mean by bass is that the core of this song lies in that little piano thing played throughout it, which gives this song, once again, a very unique but fitting tone to it. The deep bass and vocal and guitar effects throughout this thing really make this song stand out in its middle section, I would say. I think the middle section, you kind of see this build up a lot, and it kind of all comes together and wraps up nicely at the end. And then you get a totally different sound on Nothing Revealed, Everything Denied, with a much more gospel, much more R&B type sound. Well, it comes across a little bit preachy at first. The gospel influence, the Kanye West type drum patterns reminiscent of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy and the track Runaway really stick out to me a lot. Even his more, I guess, auto-tune vocals, I guess you could say, even they give me a bit more Kanye type vibes. And believe me, that's not a bad thing. I quite like Kanye's music. One of the lines, or one of the sort of parts of the lyrically that stuck out to me was when it says, "Don't mess with the poor fans, and you need the rich ones to build your floor plan." That's not the exact lyric, so don't quote me on that. But it's just such a interesting, such a cynical lyric that just adds those little lyrical elements that only the 1975 can do. At the very end of this track, you get this sort of muffled guitar solo / lead, which is reminiscent of their very early albums, but kind of is like a nice little wrap up to this track. Kind of reminds me of the guitar tone on the Kanye track Ghost Town on the album Yay. Then you get the song Tonight I Wish I Was Your Boy, which I believe has been released as a single, or at least a music video has been put out of it. It kind of follows through with that sort of Kanye type sound I was describing earlier. But it's, once again, a very soulful track, and I really like the higher vocals in the beginning of this song quite a bit. In fact, one of the things that makes this song stand out very uniquely against the rest of these is the more reggae vibes that I get from the groovy drums and the groovy bass on this track. Now, at this point in my review, I should probably say that all these songs, I have something unique to say about each of them, and yet they all flow together nicely. They all fit together to the theme of this album, lyrically, musically. It all comes together greatly. So if you think that I'm getting a little sporadic with this review by going on and on about all the little details, it matters in this review, believe me. And we once again get to a more eccentric song, Shiny Collarbone. Once again, I get that little Tom York vibe, but I still get kind of Life of Pablo era vibes as well on this track. What sounds to me like a vocal sample, I might be wrong, so don't quote me on that, is just very pleasing on the ears and very kind of strange at the same time. In the great little beat switch up at the end, where it kind of switches to a more deep 808 hip-hop beat with reminds me of Travis Scott a lot, is just such an interesting choice of percussion in the background, and it's such an interesting change compared to the first half of this song. It's definitely the best blend, I think, on this album of their soulful side and their more experimental side. And then, obviously, we end up with the grand If You're Too Shy, Let Me Know, which, I gotta start off by saying I still love that intro so much to this song. It's like the best little introduction, and then you get that nice 80s throwback with the really 80s produced drums, and then you get the very dreamy sounding guitars. And the funny part to me about this song is it's an 80s instrumental, but with extremely modern lyrics regarding like online webcam relationships, very reminiscent of A Brief Inquiry. The swooping synths in the background during the chorus is really the icing on the cake, and I just really love that synth lead that gets played every time throughout the chorus. This is a very well-constructed pop song, even if it sounds very nostalgic of the 80s, something about it, and it lies mainly in the lyrics, feels very modern and very fresh, and very unique to the 1975. And to wrap up this little section of the album, you get Playing on My Mind, which is, once again, a more folky, more acoustic track. I believe Phoebe Bridgers is in the background. I'm not 100% sure. But the little details in the background is just so pleasing to hear, and lyrically, he feels very concerned for himself mentally. It highlights a reoccurring theme of mental health throughout this album and their entire career, but I think that on this album, they arguably bring up topics of mental health much more upfront and much clearer, and I think just much more well written than some of their previous works. Then you get one of my personal favorites on this album, and arguably one of my favorites in their entire career, Having No Head. Yes, this thing is very instrumental. Yes, this thing is very synthy, poppy fun, but there's just something so good about this. It's more trance, it's more house-inspired, constant beat throughout it. Just the main one word that comes to my mind, even if people think it's cringy, is epic. This is a very epic-sounding song. Well, it gives me the Depeche Mode vibes. That comes up here and there, but they really make it unique right away, with great synth and background elements. And the wide array of synths used on this song is absolutely beautiful and absolutely astonishing. I love the way it starts with a very soft little piano with some background noise, but builds up really intensely throughout the entire course of the song, but once it reaches its peak, they cut it down back to the very beginning of where the song started with just the piano. It's a very beautiful conclusion to one of their best instrumental tracks in their entire career. The following song, What Should I Say, sounds like it could have been an outtake from A Brief Inquiry, but it still has something to give. It has interesting bass, it has solid drumming from George on this track, and it's kind of in the same vein as the previous track. But once again, this is a song that I first heard at the first listen of this album, I was like, this is decent. On the second, I liked it a little bit more. By the third listen, I really, really, really was looking forward to this track. Then, of course, you get the old British side of them, Bagsy, Not in Net, which might be the weirdest one for me to comprehend, but is British to the max. It's kind of that beat that you're used to now at this point with this album, sort of choppy staccato beat, but now with an orchestra. Where did that come from? But it fits. It fits it, and it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, it's unique. The following track, Don't Worry, was one of the most touching and emotional tracks on this entire project. It was written by Maddie's dad, Tim, and they both are featured on the vocals here, with Maddie kind of kicking it off and his dad sort of, singing the rest a little bit. It's definitely just a piano ballad, but it's touching and an emotional piece from not only Maddie personally, but for the listener. There's another one that I kind of got very emotional listening to, because the lyrics regarding depression and the beautiful collaboration between father and son comes together great on this song. Then we end this album with the more, conventional sounding song, Guys. And I was joking with my buddy saying this sounds like a credit song that would be playing at the end of a movie. And it's a very epic sounding closer. It's very funny. It's very uplifting, but it's also very touching. At first I kind of thought it was a joke, but diving deeper into the lyrics, it kind of became a bit clear to me that this isn't a joke. You start thinking it's a love song, but then he's talking really about his relationship and friendship with his bandmates, which is something you don't hear too much from a guy-to-guy basis. Overall, how do I feel about this album? I think this album is unique as hell. It does give me some Radiohead vibes, but not in the way that it sounds like them, more so in the way that it's a really big 180 from their previous works. And it's a very cleverly written album, and it's a really good statement on society, while also being very self-centered and very personal in a really solid way. One thing I realize now more than ever is just how talented each of these guys are. I think the 1975 is an extremely talented group from a musician sense. I think Maddie is an incredibly talented and diverse vocalist, and I think George is very creative on the drums. This album sees the band explore so many new territories, many territories I was definitely not even expecting. It's an album that I've already returned to a bunch of times, and it's an album that really reminds me of what Radiohead was doing on the album Kid A, when they got so caught up in their more rock sound, they did a complete left turn and made one of the most eccentric albums of the 2000s. This might be what's going on here. A Brief Inquiry is the pinnacle of everything they had done up to that point. It's very synth, it's very pop friendly, but very deep. But this one takes that very deep, emotional, very conscious element of that album, but really flips it on its side and goes a completely new direction, a direction that was well needed, and a direction that shows them off as even better musicians than on the last album. I have honestly very little negative to say about any of these tracks. Even the tracks that I'm not as crazy about, I can find something to talk about good. There's really nothing inherently bad about this album at all. I have almost nothing negative to say here. No man, I literally went out of my way to listen to this album multiple times, looking for something bad, and I had a hard time finding anything. Now, yes, I do think some of these songs shine brighter than others. Some of my favorites are, Jesus Christ 2005. I really like Having No Head. I really like Yeah, I Know. But even the songs that I'm not as crazy about, like, Then Because She Goes, is still a solid track at its core. There's not much to complain about. And at the end of the day, the main thing that sticks out to me is I feel that this album is not only the perfect album I would have ever wanted from the 1975, but it's the perfect album for the state we are living in right now. With all this coronavirus stuff going on, with all this crazy political stuff going on, it seems like there's crazy stuff flying by us every single second. And we need an album like this that is telling people to wake up, open their eyes, look at the world around them, and make a change. If this album was released a few years ago, I probably would not feel so passionate about it. But from the opening climate change messages to the more personal, emotional elements regarding, religion, sexuality, all that, and mental health especially, this album covers everything I wanted to cover. I was nervous because this song was 22 songs long. I was really thinking that there was going to be some bummers in this album. Most albums that are 22 songs long are bound to have a few duds, but this one has no duds. I think every track delivers. I'm sure some tracks will age better than others. I'm sure I will like some tracks more as time goes on. I'm sure some tracks will diminish on me as time goes on. But as of right now, this is the most relevant album I've listened to in a long time. They're talented as hell. I think the track list is practically flawless. I have almost nothing bad to say here. Nothing. At the end of the day, the small details, the great production on here also adds so much more to this album that I wasn't expecting. I think the little details throughout it, the little plucking synths, the little plucking strings throughout this thing, the really great guitar playing, the very unique sounding guitars throughout this album, is really the icing on the cake for this project for me. Like I said, with very little negative to say, even after listening to it multiple times, going out of my way to find stuff that I don't like, I'm honestly feeling a solid 10 on this album. I was not expecting it to be a 10. I was expecting at least an 8, because I knew I was probably going to dig it anyway. But oh my god, did they blow my expectations through the roof. This is one of the best albums I've heard in a long time. And I think it deserves praise. And even though it polarizes fans, and some fans love it, some fans don't, I think it's a great project. And I think from this point on, I am definitely going to be more religiously following what these guys are doing. That is it for now. The 1975 Notes on a Conditional Form is definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. The first 10 I've given on this channel, and I don't take 10s lightly. 10s is a extremely positive review that I did really like this album to give it. So, yeah, great album, the 1975 Notes on a Conditional Form. Hey guys, if you made it this far in the video, good job. It's a very long one, my longest one I believe so far that's a review. But I just realized there's something that I kind of forgot to mention, or at least something that I was looking at after the my review, after I recorded, and I was kind of thinking, like, this really does remind me a lot of Kid A, by Radiohead, that is. I was checking out some of the reviews, scores that have been given by professional critics, not YouTube critics, although ARTV kind of counts. A lot of them gave them really negative reviews of this album. A lot of them gave positive reviews. This is a very polarizing album. I know I kind of brought this up. I just wanted to take this time briefly to go a little bit more in depth. Yeah, this album seems to polarize the critics, which in my opinion is a great thing. Because the last album kind of was unanimously praised, But take a look at Kid A. Take a look at a lot of great albums that are now praised today. Like go look at back at like the really early Led Zeppelin albums or everything. Now I'm not saying that this is necessarily that level of classicness. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say that this album's gonna be remembered 30 years from now as being an instant classic. But I will say that the sort of polarizing reviews, I have a feeling that in the future they're gonna come around to it, and I feel like they're gonna like it some more because they did it with Kid A, they did it with Led Zeppelin. I don't know. It's just it's an interesting little tidbit I wanted to add at the end of this video. That's about it.